The talk that we're doing today is one, we usually have this session at my house. In normal times, we have one class session where we don't have it in the classroom, and instead we divide everybody up into small groups, and over a weekend, people come in small groups to my house. And I love that session because it provokes a different kind of discussion. And also it's kind of appropriate to have it at my house because this is really about how you live and lifestyle. So that's kind of the topic for today. So a part of how you live is how you work, what kind of job you have, and how that affects your psychology, your personality, your lifestyle. And as we have looked at in previous talks, that affects fairly fundamentally your motivation, your ability to do creative problem solving. So at the beginning of this talk, we're going to be looking at what I'm going to call 5 work issues. And in a job, are you really in a setting that allows you to be as creative as you could possibly be? And has your employer, or yourself if you're self-employed, have you put yourself in a position where you can do good creative work? Because I think the work context has a lot to do with success or no success in that regard. So we're going to talk about these 5 work issues, and I think this is something anybody looking for a job should be interested in. What kind of context is this going to put me in, and am I going to be able to have motivation 3.0? Am I going to be intrinsically motivated because of that context? So the first of these work issues has to do with capacity for personal expression. In your job, do you feel like you can be yourself and you can express yourself and you can be an individual and you feel enfranchised in that regard? And that has to do with a lot of different things. Maybe the most obvious is, do you have the ability to dress the way you like to dress and express yourself through the way you dress? And most workplaces these days, I mentioned in an earlier talk, the very first job I had in architecture, there was definitely a dress code. You had to wear, business clothes. That was just the ethos of the place in the organizational age. But most workplaces now are a little more flexible, but not all. When we're at my house and we're having this discussion, I've had a lot of students volunteer that they've had jobs like at McDonald's, where I have to wear a uniform and have to wear a funny little hat. And how does that make me feel? And for many people, it's like, okay, look, I can do that. I'm getting my, $10.50 an hour. I can do that. But I definitely don't feel comfortable in that. So that's where there's no capacity for personal expression. And sometimes even in those jobs, you're told what to say. If a customer comes up, you say, "Hello, my name is Joe. Can I take your order, please?" Or something like that. And you have to say the same thing to every customer. That again, no room for personal expression there. And I think a lot of people would just say, "Is that really important?" Yeah, I think it is important. It has an impact on your psychological state. So let me tell you a couple of stories about people who have conveyed to me the importance of personal expression in the workplace. So I was good friends with this woman who was one of the very most prominent women architects in the 1970s and 80s. And in that generation, there were very few women architects. So Natalie Dubois was a pioneer. She was an amazing, amazing woman in architecture. And she had really gotten to be an architect in an era when it was definitely male-dominated field, And the reason she got her break was because all the guys got drafted and went to World War II. She graduated from college in 1943, and all the guys were gone, and they needed architects, and so she got hired by a very, very good firm in New York. And she worked for this firm for most of her career. And she just went up, up, up the ladder. But it was hard because women were discriminated against. And she had a mentor in this firm who was very good to her. And at a certain point, he said, you know, Natalie, you've been working in the background here, but I want you to come to a client meeting. And I want you to have a kind of leadership role on the team. So there's a client meeting next Monday, and I'd like for you to attend it. This was the first time she had a chance to really be the voice of the firm. She was always in the background. So she thought, wow, I am going to make myself a killer outfit to wear to this meeting. She sewed her own clothes. This was another era where women did that. So she went out and bought some beautiful dark green wool, and she worked her ass off all through the weekend and made herself this really beautiful wool suit to wear to this meeting on Monday. So she shows up in the office on Monday morning, and Gordon Bunshaft, her mentor, takes one look at her and says, "What are you wearing?" And she said, "Well, I made a new suit to wear to the client meeting this afternoon." And he said, "Go home and change. Look, at this firm, we only wear black suits or navy blue suits. And that is completely inappropriate." So there was no room for a woman. Now, all right, guys don't wear green suits, but there was no room for a woman to wear what is a very acceptable attire for a woman, a nice business dark green suit. But because they only wore black and dark blue and navy blue, she had to fit into that mold. And Natalie said for the rest of her career, she realized, I've got to kind of become a guy to make it here. And that means I have to sacrifice a lot of who I am as a person. And I think that compromised her ability to really be as creative and expressive as she might have been, because you're being tamped down by this limitation of personal expression. Just in contrast to that, this guy's retired now, but I used to have a colleague here on campus who taught in African American studies. He was all over African culture, and he wore these colorful, crazy costumes, bright prints and wild colors and hats often, but he looked like he was right out of a Hollywood movie on Africa. And he wore them on the campus, and you'd see him walking around. And so I saw Toyin, walk by one day, and he had one of these great suits on, but he was walking with a cane. And so I said, Toyin, did you hurt your leg? Are you having to use a cane now? And he said, oh no, it's a part of the costume. So the cane and the costume and the whole sort of aura of being a prince in an African tribe, this was who he was, and he was expressing that. It's so wonderful when he felt like in his job as a professor at this university, he could express himself any way he wanted. And it's not just dress, it's also mannerisms and language and things you can talk about. Are you in a work environment where you can speak your mind? If everybody in this work environment is pretty liberal, but I'm extremely conservative, can I voice my political beliefs and not feel like I'm going to be jumped on? I had a student actually sitting in this courtyard in Goldsmith Hall a couple of weeks ago, came by in office hours, and most college students fairly liberal. He tells me, I voted for Trump, and I was a little surprised given the other conversation we just had. And he said, I don't like the guy, I don't like his behavior, but I'm Catholic. Abortion is a huge problem for me, and I have to vote for the candidate who is against abortion. Makes perfect sense. He should be able to say that, but he clearly, in his work environment as a student, he feels sometimes like he can't speak his mind about that. So just being in a work environment where you can be yourself, and even that comes down to your desk at work. Can you personalize it? The workspace itself, can you personalize it? Can you feel like I can be me in this place? And there are plenty of work environments where that's absolutely not the case. Gee, hate to say this, but I was out at Dell in Round Rock a while back, and whoa, cube. I mean, it just looked like a cube farm there. Everything exactly the same, all their little name tags on their cubes. And then once you get inside, everybody's in this little, I don't know, totally regimented kind of workspace. Can you expect people to be creative, to think individual thoughts, to look for unique solutions if you're asking them to tamp down personal expression? So one big issue here is the capacity for personal expression. A second workplace issue is whether your job is given to you with ambiguity or with clarity. So, I mean, clarity is kind of a good word usually, but sometimes you can be in a work situation where everything is prescribed. This is the way you're supposed to do this. This is the way you're supposed to do this. I can remember again when I was in that very first job I had, they had a way of doing everything. And I'll have to say, it rankled me a little bit, but this is the way you draw this, and this is the way you erase that, and this is what and it was so regimented. As opposed to a more ambiguous work assignment where you said, this is the goal, accomplish the goal, but how you do that, that's up to you. You can find your own way to do that. Find the way that's most efficient for you. Find the way that's the most fun for you. Having a little ambiguity as opposed to clarity in a job can give a window for a little more creative expression. So a third work issue is whether or not you have flexible time. Are you able to plan your life and your day yourself, or are you regimented into certain time constraints? Can you come into the office at 6:30 in the morning if you're a morning person and have an hour and a half of just good heads down time before other people come in, and you get a hell of a lot of work done, and it's quiet and you can concentrate, and that's kind of your personal time. And then people start trickling in 8, 9 o'clock, and you begin to do much more collaborative work, and you do brainstorming and you do projects together, and maybe do that for 3 or 4 hours. Maybe you have the flexibility to go take a 2-hour lunch with a friend if you want to. Somebody from out of town who's just come in, and lunch was the most convenient time to do that. So that's fine. You have the flexibility to do that. And then maybe you work another 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon, and then pack it up and go home. And your colleague over there may be doing a completely different thing. Maybe they're not a morning person at all, but they drag in at 9 o'clock, and they're sitting there drinking their coffee and kind of warming up for a good 30, 45 minutes. But something, they stay till 8 o'clock every night. And that's the way they operate best. Flexibility in time can be a very important thing in optimizing your creativity, because not everybody works on the same kind of time clock. And sometimes you're in the right frame of mind to do creative work, and other times maybe not so much. So you need to optimize those times when you are alert and active and ready, and be able to just zoom through and keep going, and not sort of have your time segmented out. I have a housekeeper who keeps my place clean, and very, very important to her that she's got flexible time. And I've told her, I'm not there during the day. I don't care what day of the week you come, really. I don't care what time of day you come. And she's like, yes, I just hate it when I have a kind of regimented schedule. And I happened to read a book a while back called Nickel and Dimed, which is about a woman who's a writer, and she became a housekeeper for an agency that sends people out, and they had it parsed out to X amount of time for dusting, X amount of time for cleaning the toilet, X amount of time. And you know, it wasn't the job that drove her nuts. It was the inflexibility of the time that drove her nuts. So sometimes the job can be a lot more interesting and enjoyable if in fact there's just flexible time and you can do it on your own terms. And it is, to some extent, a way of just having some control over the job a little bit more and feeling more enfranchised. So a third thing is flexible time. A fourth thing is the ability to work in an individual or as a group. And some people work better as individuals. Some people work better in groups all the time. That often there's an implication about what kind of workspace there is. Are you in a place where you're constantly social and interacting with people? Or are you in a hard-walled office where you're by yourself and you can have that alone time as a part of your work activity? So whether you work as an individual in a group, this is another thing that can affect the creativity that you have while you're working in that environment. And then the final thing is really quantity of work. How much work are you interested in doing? And sometimes people can be burned out and their creativity diminishes to nothing because they're working too hard. If you are motivated by intrinsic motivation, often you work a lot of hours and you're fine working a lot of hours. But if it's just gets to be a drudgery and I have to do this all day, every day, and I have no flexibility, I have no life, that can be a big deterrent to doing good creative work. Getting more challenge, getting more responsibility, getting more recognition and respect, often that has an impact on the quantity of work you're motivated to do. But 4 in 10 Americans say that amount of time they have is a bigger issue than amount of money. That ability to control the amount of time they spend at work is more important to them than how much money they make. And I think it is, especially for your generation, a really important issue. And 7 in 10 Americans say that they actually enjoy work. That's one of the better parts of their life. And that certainly is hopefully the way we're going in a creative age, where work is not something that's a drudgery, but it's something that you enjoy doing. So all of these 5 are work issues and things that set a context for being good at creative problem solving. So we couldn't be at my house this year for this talk about work and life issues. But the second best place for me would be here in Goldsmith Hall, where this is where I work a lot of time, and also spend a lot of lifetime here as well. And it's an incredible place to work. And all of those things we just talked about, wow, in my job and most university professors' jobs, all of that time flexibility, capacity for personal expression, sometimes individual, sometimes group work, all of those things are, I think it's one of the things that makes the job of a university professor enjoyable, and why we expect of university professors doing research and doing creative work that they're going to be able to be motivated with intrinsic motivation to do creative problem solving. Now, so let's talk a little bit about these life issues. And there are 4 life issues I want to talk about. One is what we'll call all the way through this semester, having an experiential life. So if you get up in the morning and you brush your teeth and take a shower and eat your breakfast and get in the car and commute on the freeway for 45 minutes and get to your workplace and have your cup of coffee and sit in your cube and stare at a computer screen and do your work all day long, and then you get back in your car and you have your 45-minute commute and you come home and you have your microwave dinner, and you sit in front of the TV screen or play a video game until bedtime, and then you do that over and over and over and over and over again. This is not an experiential life. This is a narrow kind of life. An experiential life is one where you have a lot of interest, you do a lot of different things. You maybe do sports, you maybe do fitness, you maybe do a lot of reading, you maybe go to a lot of films, you maybe go to music, you maybe go to art museums, you maybe travel. All of these things are encouraging an experiential life, giving you stimulus, giving you experiences that provoke ideas. And it's very hard to be a creative person if you don't have those experiences that help to provoke ideas. So the first thing is this notion of an experiential life. And definitely in the check-in, I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this with you individually on a personal level. Are you interested in strategizing so you have an experiential life? Even as a student here at UT, are you having an experiential life? Or has it gotten narrowed down to where it's not very experiential? It's definitely an issue here in COVID times. Can we have the most experiential life possible? Because a lot of things are off the table. But in regular times, are you strategizing to have an experiential life? A second life issue is interdisciplinarity, or range of interest. Do you know, maybe you're a computer science major and you're into video games and your entire life is technology, digital technology. It's just all about digital technology. This is not as interdisciplinary as someone, say, like Albert Einstein, who he was a physicist, but he also was a very good musician. Did you know that? Played the violin, very good at playing the violin. And he practiced very regularly on the violin. He also was very, very interested in philosophy, read philosophy. He had a little book club. These guys, they all read philosophy and then discussed it among themselves. So here's a guy who, yes, he's a physicist, but he's an interdisciplinary guy. He's also interested in music. He's also interested in philosophy. And that's part of why he was such a great creative problem solver, because he had this interdisciplinary life, many interests of different sorts. A third thing in these, among these life issues is the notion of whether you have physical as well as mental activity. And this is all over in the literature on creativity. Kind of surprising to me when I started really doing a deep dive into this stuff. But over and over, it says to be a more creative person, you need to have a physical life. And this is definitely a Richard Florida thing. He's all over golf and tennis and hiking, and it doesn't matter what kind of physical activity, but being a gym rat or being a rock climber or being a basketball nut or whatever, anything that gets your body moving and that actually gives you physical vigor. These are things that honestly help you in terms of your mental state for creative problem solving. It simply makes you more susceptible to good ideas and out-of-the-box thinking if in fact your blood is rushing and moving with physical activity at some regular points in your life. Surprising, but true. Then the fourth and final thing in terms of life is, and this is kind of a tricky one, people who are creative tend to have lots of loose ties. They may have strong ties in terms of relationships, but they definitely have lots of loose ties. And this is saying that, you know, it's cool to have, you know, 3 best friends and you spend all your time with these 3 people. But actually, it probably makes you a more creative person if you have 25 people that you occasionally have lunch with. And they're much more diverse than 3 people could possibly be. And you just get more exposure. And And those loose ties are good ways of trying things out with very little risk. People that you can have a conversation with that's not something that's going to have long-term implications in your relationship, but that's just going to be something you can throw out and talk about and get a little reaction to that. So in friendship formations, do you think about, do I have lots of loose ties? Do I have many people that I encounter, that I benefit from, that I know, that I have some connection to, but not in a serious, necessarily long-term way? So, in the literature on creative problem solving, these are 4 life issues that are important. Do you have an experiential life? Do you have interdisciplinary or broad interests? Are you thinking about physical activity as well as mental activity? Is that a part of your life? And do you have plenty of loose ties as well as strong ties? So again, in our check-in, I want you to think about, number 1, do you think this is bullshit? I mean, do you think you do? In order to be a creative person, you've got to have a work situation and a life situation that supports that. And in fact, are these things that are important in making you a creative problem solver? So think about that, and we'll have a chat on it in the check-in. See you.